That voice in your head, the one that whispers you're just not good enough, what if you could silence it? In today's world where there's a constant push to hustle, to work harder, to do more, that you're just not good enough. What if we could change that and look at self-compassion instead? What if you could invite that in and have a better relationship with yourself?
Yeah, self-grace. Stop and quit comparing yourself. Everybody's on social media and you're seeing them at the beach, they're traveling, they have this fancy new car, they have this beautiful new house, and wow, it's just time to stop. Stop comparing, stop trying to be someone else. It's human nature, but just don't do it.
Right. Why do you think that this is such a struggle for our entrepreneurs? I mean, our clients, we deal with it ourselves. Why are we our worst critic?
I think it's some of it's competitiveness. Just genuinely, we want to win. And if we're driven, we want that. And also, I think perfectionism. I think that we want it to be just right.
Right.
And we go too far sometimes in trying to achieve that.
That sounds good. Yeah, so let's dive into that perfectionism a little bit. And it's really that relentless pursuit of flawlessness. And can you relate to that? I think as leaders, we are leading others. We want to do things the right way, but we can get so caught up in that what we do is never good enough. And we tend to set this high bar as entrepreneurs that is really, it's just not achievable. And even if we accomplish these big things in our life, and I talk about this in my book, The Success Lie, we just keep wanting to achieve more and more. And even though maybe we've won awards, we've had a very successful business, we've been honored for different things, but yet then we hit that one goal, and then what's next? It seems to lose its value, and then we're chasing after that next thing again.
Right. And with that, we become self-doubt. And we have a client that we've been working with recently, and he's been successful year after year after year. And then the last 4 or 5 hires haven't quite worked out. And we're talking to him. He's like, I can't hire anybody.
Right.
I don't know how to hire anybody. I don't know what to do. I give up. And oh, by the way, I have to hire someone to hire somebody.
Right.
And so he's in this vicious cycle of, he's criticizing himself. And he's done it beautifully for decades.
Right.
It's just the last little bit that has caused this criticism, self-criticism.
Right. Well, and I think it goes, and we talk about this a lot, to mindset and the fact that the negative thoughts that we have, that negative self-talk, negative self-talk, and those negative thoughts that race around in our mind. And we think between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. Most of them, 80, 90%, are negative. So if we allow ourselves to get wrapped up in those, then our thinking becomes negative. What we speak becomes negative, like our client was going through. And then that's how we're being seen to others too, which is not how we want to be. We're not being the example that we need to be as leaders. So what's some of the other things that can get in the way and cause this struggle of this harsh self-criticism?
I think it's all or nothing talk, or all or nothing looking at others. And in his case, it's all or nothing. I can't hire.
Right.
Done.
Right.
End of story. Instead of, let me work on this. So it's all or nothing. I am either going to win or lose.
Right.
It's black or white. It's, it's good or bad.
Right.
And so we get stuck in that as well, where what is it? Maybe it's somewhere in between.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And another thing you started talking about at the beginning was just this comparison. And I think that this is just getting worse. I mean, I remember the days before we had this instant access to everything. And the good news now is we have instant access to everything. The bad news now is we have instant access to everything. So we're seeing how others are doing, and where before we weren't seeing that every day. It wasn't in our faces. And now on social media, when everybody's putting their highlight reels, their best selves up on social media, and you see this CEO winning this award, and this one over here has done this with their business. And I mean, there's just all these accolades that you're seeing. And no matter where you are, you're going to see others that are 10 steps ahead of you. It doesn't matter how much success that you've had, there's always going to be people that are more successful. And you can get caught up in this loop of comparing to other people. And then that gets you to really be this critical, have this critical judgment of yourself, and which isn't a way to live.
Right. And if we're in this struggle, if we're struggling with this self-criticism, we're comparing, we're doing all of this, how do we get out of it? You know, and it's a vicious cycle because we think we do or we don't. And we really have to address each piece of it. And the big one you just mentioned is mindfulness. You know, we need to be mindful of the situation.
Right. Thinking about what we're thinking about, so important in all of this. Another struggle is just setting unrealistic expectations. And I think what we talked about in this high bar that we set for ourselves. So if we are constantly putting this impossible bar, these impossible goals, then we're not going to hit them. And then I think that can get us continuing to get caught up in this as well.
Right. And I think that there needs to be stages in those goals too. You know, don't put them so short that they're too easy. Right. But don't set them so far that they're unrealistic. And, you know, where is that? And that's where having a coach or someone to help you, just a friend, come in and say, hey, look, are you sure you can go from 300,000 to 10 million this year? You know,
right.
You might be able to.
Yes. Yeah.
But let's set a realistic goal.
Exactly. And I think what you're talking about with our client is the last struggle that comes to mind is just things where maybe there's been failure in the past. So when you're looking at past circumstances, if you've failed in some way, if you've lost that big client, if you've had to fire that team member, if you've had something where you've set this big goal and you've just fell flat on your face, and this happens, but you can get caught up in that past and not be able to get yourself past it. And that just creates judgment. So I failed this time, so I'm going to fail the next time, which again goes back to that critical thinking, that judgment, which doesn't help.
You're self-identifying. You're self-identifying that I am a failure at hiring a new person. I'm not good enough at that.
Right.
And that's not your identity. That's not, you shouldn't self-identify to that. Be mindful of the fact that, hey, that didn't work. Let's do it a different way. Oh, I didn't quite say that correctly. Let me try again. Sorry. Let's do it another way. And don't identify yourself as the error.
Yes.
It was an error.
Right.
It's, you know, it's not something to identify yourself as.
So the turning point, what's the turning point to all this? And we've talked about all of the things that we typically do. And the turning point is really being able to have the grace, the self-grace and the compassion, which is so difficult to do. And so let's talk about how we can bring more grace into our own life and having a better relationship with ourselves, which is so critical. Great job making it this far and being committed to your personal and professional growth. Now, we want to make sure that you're able to take the lessons from this episode and apply them to your leadership and life. So we've created absolutely free a downloadable worksheet that you can download right now, and it's going to show you the top lessons of today's episode and, more importantly, help you create an action plan so you can take these principles and put them in process in your life right away. So go ahead and get this resource and let's get back to it.
Yeah, I think that, I think just what I mentioned before, identify something else. Be mindful of what you're doing and how you're putting yourself out there and give yourself grace towards that. And you're human. You will make mistakes and just own it and move on.
Right.
Don't try and just let it go. Right?
And how can you bring this compassion to yourself? And I think the first step is, as we were beginning to talk about this mindfulness, are you recognizing where you're beating yourself up? And because if you aren't thinking about what you're thinking about, if you're not recognizing what the voices are saying in your head, you can't silence them. So it starts there with being aware that you're doing this, aware of your negative mindset, aware that you're constantly beating yourself up, Or to take this further, beating up others as far as the high expectation that you have of others and they're never meeting the mark. I mean, that doesn't work either. But for sake of this podcast, we're really talking about starting with yourself and that kindness, that self-compassion, being willing to give that to yourself, which, let's face it, we're not very good at oftentimes.
No.
We need to improve.
Yeah, and I think another way to do that is to start and write some of them down. Journal what you're struggling with.
Right.
And then
He's talking about journaling, guys.
I'm only talking about it. I'm not going to do it. You all should do this, but I'm not going to.
I love that. He was taking a piece from my book. Write it down. It does make a difference.
Right. But then reframe it. So if it's a negative and you're identifying it as this, then write it in the positive, write it in another way that would be useful. So
Right.
yes, journaling can work. It works great.
Right. And having somebody else in your life that's an accountability partner, like you talked about, having a coach that can be a trusted advisor to you. We do this for each other. You can have somebody on your executive team, somebody on your leadership team do this with you, a friend do this with you. But have them call you out when you are starting to talk negatively about a situation or you're beating yourself up, because sometimes, like we talked about, you don't realize you're doing it. So how do you stop the pattern? Ideally, if you can recognize it in yourself, but a way to help that happen is to have an accountability partner in your life that said, hey, you're beating yourself up on this.
Yeah.
And helping you catch yourself in the act. And that can make a difference. So another way is, and this one has always worked really well for me, when I find that I'm beating myself up, and I certainly beat myself up on a situation more than anybody else ever would, and you probably may think the same thing, is how would you talk to a friend who is in the same situation? And when I go there, that typically stops me in my tracks, because as many of you, you're a servant-hearted leader. Your focus is really caring and serving those in your life, on your leadership team, the folks that work with you, your family, your friends. And when you have a colleague or a team member that's going through a tough situation and they're beating themselves up, you would come alongside them and you may help them hold up the mirror and have an honest, vulnerable conversation or a courageous conversation. But that is going to be also covered in grace, covered in kindness. But it's so hard for us to do that with ourselves. So what I said stopped me in my tracks is when I'm beating myself up on a situation. If I think about if my friend Stacy was going through this very same thing that I am right now, what would I say to her? So I think that can be, when you talked about reframing, sometimes you're so stuck in your own thoughts, you can't get out of it. But if you step outside yourself and pretend for a moment that you have somebody you care deeply about that is going through this very same situation, what would you say to them?
Right. So you take the self-judgment and turn it into self-kindness.
And compassion.
And compassion.
Right.
Grace, however you want to call it. But yeah, no, that's good.
Okay.
That's probably easier said than done. That's why you need that other person.
Right.
You need somebody, because how often do you stop yourself and say, oh, gee, I was mean to myself. But you can see it in somebody else.
Right.
Say, man, I can't believe you just said that.
Right. Yes.
So,
and I think when you do this, I know that it's happened in my own leadership, is when your team members see that you have not done something you wanted to do, maybe you didn't meet a goal as a company, as a team, and you look at it seriously and identify, have a lessons learned meeting where you talk about why you didn't meet the goals and maybe what everybody could have done, what we've learned from it. But then if you can set that example of giving yourselves that compassion and really looking at, okay, what do we need to do differently going forward? But then being willing to let that pass go.
Right. And I think that it's not an isolated event. You know, we're all humans. It's going to come and go. It's going to ebb and flow. So I think taking all of that and just being aware to use it as a turning point, as a learning.
Right. No, that's really good. So how do we go forward? How do we live this really a life of grace, building a life of grace? Because for me, for you, you probably are having this is a constant. There's always going to be a voice in your head. There's always going to be a challenge that you're facing, and the temptation to let it knock your legs out from underneath you and to have you really beat yourself up. So how can you build this life of grace? Let's talk about some tangible tools that you can take away today and begin applying in your life right now.
Well, I think that, and it reminds me, and I'll read it because it's way better than me trying to come up off the top of my head, but Colossians 3:12, therefore as God's chosen people, holy and clearly, dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It's right there. How beautiful is that?
Right.
Clothe yourself with compassion.
I love that. So practicing self-compassion, and how to practically do that is, I think, a daily check-in. And this is something that I do in my morning routine and teach our community to do. And really taking that mindful moment, ideally the morning mindful moment, where you're really checking in with yourself and how did I do yesterday? How did I show up yesterday? And how was I talking to myself? And really taking an honest look at, did you have a joyful day, a day of where you had an optimistic mindset, a day full of gratitude where you were celebrating the good things in your life? Or was it a day of complaining and self-judgment and beating yourself up and negative thoughts that you didn't grab a hold on? And I really think it has to be part of a daily practice.
Right. I think that's true. And I think that something else we need to do is just challenge those unrealistic goals.
Yep.
We need to stop, and that it has to be a part of the daily practice too.
Right.
Is that a realistic goal or an unrealistic goal? Did I set it so that it was too far out and it was unrealistic, or really did I just not achieve that goal and I should have?
Right.
And we need to be set those realistic goals. So I think that that's something else. And again, it's part of the daily measuring.
Right. I like that. And creating an environment in your team, in your family, of that it's okay to fail. We heard a great speaker a couple months ago that actually put in place with their leadership team that every week they wouldn't just talk about their wins, they would actually talk about their failures. And at first I didn't know how I felt about this, because I just thought, I like to focus on the positive.
She's always got to have the positive
and
spin,
which is important. But what I liked about this, and see what you think about it, is by having everybody say, what did I fail at last week? You're able to make an environment where it's okay to fail. It's not to beat yourself up, but it's like, wow, I didn't meet this, or I didn't do as well as I would have liked in this area. And then practicing that self-compassion and then saying what you're going to do next. Oh, wow, I tried it this way, it didn't work, and now I've actually reached out to a colleague who's had a lot of success in this area, and I'm going to do this tweak and try this again. So thinking about things like that, and that's something to think about, is do you talk openly about where you see you have failed in something or fallen short, but yet that's an opportunity for growth. So you're not really looking at anything as a failure, you're looking at everything as an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, we have a colleague that he takes his sales team, and every Monday morning they talk about the good and the bad of the previous week.
Oh, I like that.
And so, the failures. And what they're doing with the failures and he said, when you're first on the team, you're embarrassed, you don't want to do it, you hate it, and it actually separates some people. Some people just quit because they can't take it.
Sure.
However, when they start talking about those failures as a group and everybody owns them, somebody's been successful. They're able to turn that, the client that they didn't get into a client that they did get, I guess. And so it's the prospect turned to a client because they've learned how to talk differently or say something differently to try and to get them. So I think it's important to do that.
Good. Practicing forgiveness. I think for forgiving yourself for beating yourself up. Because again, this is going to need to be something done on a regular basis where, wow, you've realized that you've been really beating yourself up on a particular thing, and it's just a natural tendency. And in order to really let it go, you talked about letting it go earlier, is you need to just forgive yourself and then let it go. Like you said, we're human, right? And so often we don't let ourselves be human. We think we have to be perfect all the time. And
Well, I am.
you are most of the time, okay, but not all the time.
No, but yeah, you're right. We need to forgive ourselves. And
Right.
so often it's easy to forgive others and not ourselves.
So true.
Yeah. And then self-care, I think, is something else you could do.
Right.
You like massages, and so there you go. There's some self-care for you.
I think self-care, we tend to, what was it when you're tired and you're hungry, there's one other thing, tired, hungry, I can't remember the third right now, that you tend to not operate at your best. So don't make decisions when you're tired or hungry. No, I can't remember the third. Maybe you can tell us if you remember that one. But anyway, having that self-care where you're actually making time to take care of yourself, making sure you're getting enough rest, making sure that you're getting enough food and you're fueling your body. Because when you are tired or hungry, your fuse is short. And then you're going to fall into these self-deprecating patterns, which are common. So making sure that you're doing the self-care to take good care of yourself is important.
You don't want to go blow up.
Right.
Which is my tendency.
Well, it can be, right?
Nope,
and
right.
I think most of us can have an issue with that there's, especially if there's something unresolved in our life. So that self-check, those mindful moments, how did I do? How am I going to do today? How am I going to show up today?
Right. I think something else is surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with uplifting people.
Right. That's so important because you are who you hang out with, right? And that makes such a difference if you are spending time, even if you've hired people on your team and they are just focused on what's wrong, focused on the negative, they're complaining. If you have friends in your life, colleagues in your life, and they're complaining, it doesn't work.
Right. The gossip, the water cooler talk, just stop it.
Right.
Don't do it.
No, we actually had, and I highly recommend, we definitely set an example. We had a person on the team, and this can often happen. One person can then spread negativity, and it was one of our team members who just couldn't stop the gossip and back talking. And there had been conversations about it more than once, and it just was not changing. And it seemed to be really a deep attitude that was there that just wasn't a culture fit. And we parted ways. And immediately it told the message that we're not going to be a culture like this. This isn't who we are. And we're not going to allow somebody on the team that is operating this way. Because, I mean, if you're, as the CEO, you're responsible for the team, right? It starts with you, but then you're responsible for the team and you need to hold people accountable to whatever those values are. You've got to live them and others got to live them.
Right.
So gratitude, I think, focusing on the good. When you have a gratitude practice, when you're focusing on the good in your life, which we talk about a lot, this gets you out of that self-criticizing mode, because you can't be having a critical thought and a thought of gratitude at the same time. That your brain just doesn't work that way. So if instead of focusing on all these things that are going wrong and beating yourself up, you can find the good in your life, and it's always there.
That's good.
Yeah,
Anything else? I think we covered a lot.
we did.
What the struggle is, what the turning points are, and what to be aware of, and then what we can do to go forward to try and eliminate these.
Right. So we recognized these patterns of self-defeating interactions, and that just doesn't work. And hopefully you recognize some of those today in yourself, and also took some of the tools to be able to improve your own life and to just invite grace in, to bring grace into your own life, to really shut down that voice on that inner critic once and for all, by embracing grace in your life. Self-grace is a gift that you give yourself. It's your choice to accept yourself as worthy, to embrace your imperfections as a part of being beautifully human. So embrace grace in your life and improve the relationship with yourself and others. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop to really help you grow in your leadership and level up your life and your mindset.
Watch one of these other videos, share with a friend, and don't forget, download the PDF from today's topic so that you can make sure to hold yourself accountable and take that action plan and use it.
Have a great day.